name is Fernando Johnston. I'm a principal analyst at IPART, and today I'll be talking about the process on how to become accredited for the new battery activities that have been introduced to the peak demand reduction scheme. But I'd like to first start with the acknowledgement of country. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands that we are all joining from today, and pay my respect to elders both past and present. And I would also like to extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders present here today. So we've been getting lots of queries from people interested in the new activities and how to become accredited. So we put together this presentation that will help you hopefully address some of the questions you have. And today we'll provide a bit of an overview about the PDRS scheme and how it works, who we are at IPART and what are we responsible for. I'll talk a little bit about the legislative requirements. I won't go into too much detail about the technical requirements for each activities. The PDRS method guide has been published on our website and contains all the guidance on the requirements for these new activities. I'll explain what the Accredited Certificate Provider's responsibilities are in the scheme. And then I will spend a bit more time explaining the application process to become an ACP, what are the things you need to consider to prepare and submit your application, making sure that it's all complete and of good quality. And at the end, I'll also explain a little bit about the assessment process and the decision making. Please note that I won't be also talking about any policy matters. Those queries should be referred to the policymaker DQ. So today's purpose is just really about explaining the application process and what are the things to consider for submitting your application if you are interested in becoming accredited as an ACP. A little bit of housekeeping. We'll run a presentation for about 30-40 minutes, and then we'll have time for questions at the end. But please feel free to pop in your questions in the chat. There's other members of the team that will be looking at those and responding to them. For more complex questions, I will leave that at the end for discussion. And a recording of the presentation will be also made available. Okay, so let's just start with a bit of an introduction to the PDRS scheme. It's one of the schemes that's part of the New South Wales Energy Security Safeguard, similar to the Energy Savings Scheme, which is also part of that safeguard. It's important to note that this is not a rebate scheme, so the financial incentive doesn't come in the form of a grant provided by the government. The incentive comes in the form of the certificates you create from the activities you implement. So the diagram there shows that when you're engaging with households and businesses to install batteries and implement these activities, the amount of peak demand reduction that's achieved by implementing those activities then allows you to calculate and create the certificates if they're all done in accordance with the rules. And then ACPs can sell those certificates in the market. We don't regulate the market and we don't set a price for those certificates. So that's something that it's outside our remit. Scheme participants are the liable entities, which in the case of PDRS is mostly electricity retailers. They have an obligation to purchase the certificate and then surrender them to meet their targets. So that's the demand side of things, and the ACPs providing the certificates is the supply side. Also important to note is that because it's not a rebate scheme, and when you apply, you don't get a license straight away. it's a bit of a long time until you're able to actually create those certificates and sell them. So we'll talk a little bit about later in the further slides to talk about all the steps that are involved in becoming accredited and what happens after you get accredited. Also, we'll also explain that in the next slides, but there's obligations and responsibilities for ACPs, which means that there's also that involves a cost of participating, which means you have to have things in place. And if you're interested in participating, becoming an ACP is not the only option. You can also participate working for an existing ACP as an installer, for example. So we'll talk a little about that in the further slides, just to sort of explain whether participating as an ACP or as a third party is the right option for you. So who are we? We at IPART, we are the administrator and the regulator of the peak demand reduction scheme, which means we perform a number of functions such as accrediting the ACPs and assessing the applications to become ACPs. Once ACPs get their accreditation, we also monitor and manage and report the ACP's compliance. We don't cover that too much in this presentation. That could be also the subject of a future session. Today we'll be focusing more on the application side of things, but there's other functions that we perform, such as providing guidance and templates. We'll also talk a little bit about the documentation that we've put together for you to be able to apply for accreditation for these activities. We also have an obligation to protect consumers. There's, as you probably heard in media and the news, a lot of concern about batteries and heat pumps. So it's important that ACPs and the installers and the stakeholders participating in the scheme make sure that equipment and these activities are safe and installed in accordance with standards. As I said earlier in the previous slide, we don't regulate the market. We don't manage the certificate trading. That's up to you. So here I'll talk a little bit about the legislative framework. Most of the PDRS requirements are set out in these three key pieces of legislation. The one on the left-hand side is the Act, then there's also a regulation, and the one on the right-hand side is the PDRS rule. The Act and the regulation, they set like the high-level requirements, such as like setting the obligations and requirements for the scheme administrator and regulator. The rule, on the other hand, it's more specific about the calculation methods and the activities. So it will contain requirements that relate to battery activities. Another thing to point here is that we don't make the rules. That is a matter for the policy agency. So the PDRS rule has the detailed requirements for the two battery activities that have been introduced to the PDRS scheme. That's BESS 1 and BESS 2. These are the specific requirements are detailed in the schedules at the end of the rule. Schedule C is for BESS 1, which is about installing a new battery. And BESS 2 is the requirements for BESS 2 are outlined in Schedule D, which is about signing a contract to participate in, to sign a contract for demand response control. Now, apart from the requirements set in the Act, the regulation, and the rule, we also set some additional requirements which are outlined in the PDRS method guide. The method guide also provides guidance on the requirements that are outlined in the rule. So I really encourage you to read the method guide to get familiarized with all the requirements, because these are the things that when you apply, you need to demonstrate that you have the capacity to undertake these activities in accordance with all these requirements. Some of the requirements that are outlined in the method guide have to do with ensuring that you're the capacity holder, which is like being nominated by your customers so that you can create the certificates for them. It will explain the eligibility, equipment, and implementation requirements outlined in the rule. It also describes requirements around record keeping, which is a very important aspect of the accreditation process, just making sure that you have systems in place to collect and manage the evidence to demonstrate that you're meeting these requirements. It also outlines requirements for how you manage customers, which is also, as I mentioned earlier, there's a strong focus on customer protection. So this is also an important requirement. It all has to do on how you engage with them. You're making sure that you're explaining the activities that you're conducting, and also that you have processes in place to resolve and manage complaints. If you intend to work as an aggregator and work with other parties, such as installers, to undertake the activities on your behalf, there's also requirements for you to manage and train what we call them representatives. So we will look at how you manage the contracts, and also that the training documentation you have to explain the requirements to them also include all the relevant content. There's also requirements about risk, how you perform risk assessment, how you identify, monitor, and resolve those risks. This is particularly relevant because these activities are meant to be delivered for the residential customers. With that, there's also a requirement to have internal audit procedures just to make sure that the process to assess and manage that risk are adequately monitored, and that the controls you have in place are effectively working. And there's also requirements that explain how you calculate the demand reduction capacity and the certificates that are associated with them. It outlines all the methodology, the factors that are considered in the calculation of these things. And there's also further guidance on how to conduct audits and comply with the conditions of accreditations, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. As I mentioned earlier, the PDRS method guide now is published, so you can check the latest updates on our website, where you can find a link to the method guide. So now I'll talk a little bit about ACPs and what they are responsible for. They perform a number of tasks and are responsible for a number of things, but essentially even though you might be working with other parties, the Accredited Certificate Provider is responsible for all the activities that are done as part of the accreditation. So that means implementing the eligible activities. So whether you're doing that yourself or you're engaging with the third parties, it's important that the batteries in this case are installed in accordance with the requirements. And for that, you have to demonstrate and describe the process that you have in place to achieve that. They are also responsible for managing the installers, making sure that for activities that are required to be implemented by licensed people, that they are adequately accredited and have all the qualifications required to install the equipment. as I mentioned earlier, an obligation to engage and protect consumers and making sure they understand what the activities comprise, and at the end, ensuring that customers are satisfied with the implementations. They're also responsible for ensuring that all the evidence that is collected, whether you collect that yourself or through installers, you are responsible for making sure that all that evidence is accurate and complete, including the calculation of certificates and peak demand reduction capacity. So if you are interested in becoming accredited, we would like to know what your business model is, whether you intend to work with other parties. So when applying, please tell us about that, who you're working with, and who will be responsible for conducting every task. So now onto the application process. And I think this is where I will really like to focus on today's presentation, just to make sure that you understand the requirements and what all the different steps that involve in the process of applying for accreditation. Important to note that, as I said at the beginning, when you apply and you pay the application fee, you don't get a license straight away. There's an assessment process that can take some time, up to 4 months. It can take less depending on the quality of the application. So I'd like to emphasize that the preparation that's required in step 1, which means basically reading the guidance and understanding the requirement, is really crucial, because if you are addressing all these requirements adequately, you're providing all the information, and you're clearly describing the processes and systems that you will have in place, that potentially means that your application might assess in less time, because there could be maybe less need for requests for informations and things that we need to resolve. But nevertheless, I think the important point to make here is that it can take some time until you get accredited. You must pay an application fee of $2,500 for each application. So if you want to apply for BEST 1 and BEST 2, this will be separate, and there's an application fee that applies to both. I'll be talking a little bit more about what's required in the preparation of the application in the next slide, but what I would like to point out here is that there's several steps involved in submitting the application. There's also guidance available on how you submit your application. We use a portal, which we call it TESSA, and I'll explain a little bit about that later. And then also emphasizing step 5 and step 6, which is what the application assessment, where the application assessment takes place, and that it can take some time. Okay, so as part of the application, you need to complete application forms. In the case of battery activities, there will be an application Part A and an application form Part B. The Part A is covers more general requirements about your business, how you engage with customers, record keeping and QA procedures. And the application form Part B covers the requirements that are specific to battery activities. So for Part A, you can find guidance in the application guide, which we'll also publish soon, and it outlines these requirements, but also covered in the PDRS method guide. So you can find all the guidance there, including the requirements that are specific for the 2 battery activities. The forms have a number of questions asking you to describe your business processes, and sometimes they will also request you to attach supporting documentation. Some of the requirements require you to have documented procedures, such as record keeping, so you will be also required to provide those when you submit your application. There will be 2 Part A forms, one for existing ACPs, which is a bit of a more streamlined form. For businesses that are new to the schemes, there's another application, Part A, that you need to complete. If you will be running a survey at the end of this forum. So if you're interested in becoming accredited, we will send you an application pack with the links to all these forms and the guidance that you need to read to be able to fill in these forms. So I mentioned the supporting documentation that needs to be attached with the application forms. I won't cover them all in detail. That's all explained in the guidance, but I'll just mention some examples. You need to provide a company extract, which basically tell us who your office holders are, and then that allows us to perform checks and look at the compliance records if you're participating in other schemes, and also do some credit checks. The activity delivery flowchart is also an important document that you need to provide, because it gives us a good indication of who's doing what and at what point in terms of delivering the activity. There's a nice sort of graphical summary to understand how you're going to deliver these activities. There would be also a requirement for you to attach your documented customer engagement procedures. The PDRS method guide outlines what needs to be in that procedure and what are the aspects you need to cover. Same with the training material. The guide explains what's the content that needs to be there. These two are an important piece of documentation that you need to provide, particularly if you are using an aggregator model and you're relying on other parties to deliver the activities for you. This is all about making sure that your representatives understand the requirements when performing these activities. Other examples are the record keeping and QA procedures. That's also explained in the method guide. This is just making sure that you have the right procedures and systems in place, all the tools that are required for you to collect records when you're implementing your activities, but also making sure that you get the complete evidence pack required, and that all the information that you're providing, it's accurate. This is very important for when, if you get accredited, then you go through the auditing process, just to make sure that you have all the required evidence for auditors to check that these activities were implemented in accordance with the rules. There's also risk management requirements outlined, and you need to provide your risk management policy and also risk register identifying key risk associated with the implementation of these activities. So things like safety, property damage, and in other areas, just to make sure that consumers are protected. And you also need to provide your calculation tool, which you can develop your own, or you can also use softwares are available. And the requirements are basically that in whatever format you're providing these tools, that the calculation is done in accordance with the requirements outlined in the rule. So in the application forms, there's a number of questions that you need to complete. These questions relate directly to the requirements that are outlined in the method guide, and which is why I said it's important that you get familiarized with them, read the method guide. If you get a good understanding of these requirements, you'll then be able to provide good descriptions about how you're going to ensure that you're meeting these requirements. So, for example, with slide shows requirements for risk management. you will be required to describe what your policy is and what your internal audit procedures are. And the question would also then ask you to attach that documentation to us. So there will be a section in the method guide that explains what those requirements are around identifying, monitoring, and managing risk. So all the questions will be related to a particular aspect that's outlined in the method guide. An important thing to consider is that when you're describing your processes, you can outline the requirements, but they're all described in the guides anyway, and we're quite familiar with them. So what we're really interested here is that you describe your process and your systems and basically what are the things that you're gonna do to ensure that you're meeting these requirements. So please tell us more about your business, not so much about restating what the requirements are, because it's all already outlined in the guides. So the two application forms will also have checklists at the end. Very important that you check that you fill in all the information that's required, that you've answered all the relevant questions, and that you've attached all the supporting documentation that's required. Very important to then, as I mentioned earlier, avoid having to address any gaps in the information through the request for information process. So again, that sort of links directly to the times required for assessing your application. So just make sure that once you're ready to submit, that you check that you have all the supporting documentation and all the documents that are required. So the next step then is, once you've completed all your application pack, you will then submit your application via this portal. We call it TESSA. The first thing you need to do, if you haven't done so already, is to register. So you can create an account, which allows you then to access the portal. And in the portal, you then be able to raise a case, and the one that's required for applying is application for accreditation, as shown in the picture below. There's also a few fields that you need to complete in TESSA, things like your company name and selecting the methods that you're applying. But important that you attach and upload all the required documentation. So you then submit your application, it will come up in our system, and then once you pay the fee, your application will be allocated to an analyst for assessment. So basically what we're checking in your application is that the information you provided demonstrate that you're competent and capable to participate in the scheme, and that you're able to deliver these activities in accordance with the requirements. So one of the things we check is that you have obviously robust systems and processes in place. We also check whether you're a fit and proper person. So we look at, I mentioned credit checks to see whether there's any issues with any of the office holders of the company. We can also look at if you're participating in other similar schemes like the Victorian Energy Upgrades or the RED scheme with the Clean Energy Regulator. We can also request the other regulators to provide compliance records to look at how you're participating in these other schemes. We want to make sure that you have a good understanding of the activities and requirements, and that you, as I mentioned earlier, have robust systems in place to manage your customers, installers, contractors, and also good record keeping and QA procedures. At the end of the assessment, and mentioned the RFI process. So if there's any gaps in the information you provide, there will be opportunities for you to address those gaps. So that's all through the RFI process, which is done also in TESSA, and provides you an opportunity to resolve those issues. It also provides an opportunity for us to clarify any requirements that you're not sure of. We typically allow 2 RFIs. So at the end of that process, we will then be ready to make a recommendation in relation to your application. So if we're satisfied that you've demonstrated you have the capacity to be accredited, we'll be making a recommendation to the scheme administrator, which is the tribunal or the delegated committee, to approve your application. So again, let me please reiterate the importance of submitting a good quality application, which is the purpose of one of the objectives of this forum, that you have a good understanding, so that then will benefit you and us as well in terms of the time required to assess your application and hopefully get a good outcome. The reason why we're setting the bar so high is to then make sure that you are successful in the scheme. If you get accredited, there's ongoing compliance, so you still have to demonstrate that you are delivering these activities in accordance with the requirements of the rule. So if you get accredited, then you will receive your accreditation documents. The one shown in the picture is the accreditation notice, which outlines your obligations and also the conditions of accreditation. These conditions would then outline things that you need to do after getting accredited. I mentioned audits, for example. So conditions would establish things like the type of whether you have to do a pre-reg audit of your certificates, which means that you have to audit those activities before being able to create those certificates. And there's other conditions that we could impose in terms of limits, for example, that are applied in terms of certificate creation. So again, there's ongoing expectation to meet these standards. You must continue to show competency and making sure that you're meeting the conditions outlined in your accreditation. You can find, if you get accredited, you'll find these documents in TESSA. So if you get accredited, we'll be uploading the accreditation notice and also a letter that basically explains what your obligations are as an ACP. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the presentation. Let's just quickly recap what I discussed here today. We gave an overview of the PDRS. So again, important to note that it's not a rebate scheme. It's a certificate-based scheme. The financial incentive will come in when you're able to create and sell those certificates in the market. I've also explained what our role is as the scheme administrator and regulator. The legislative requirements that provide the framework for the PDRS and these activities. So that's the Act, the regulation, and the PDRS rule, but also additional requirements that are outlined in the PDRS method guide. I've also explained what the role of the ACP is. Important to note that depending on regardless of what your business model is, the ACP is still responsible for ensuring that these activities are delivered in accordance with the requirements. So if you're an aggregator working with other parties, you make sure that they also understand what these requirements are and that the activities that they're conducting are also in accordance with the rule. Explain the application process for becoming an ACP and the importance of making sure that you understand what's required from you and what are the documentation that you need to provide to us, making sure that it's complete and accurate. This is going to save you time during the assessment process. So I mentioned that we will now soon conducting a poll. If you're interested in becoming accredited, please express your interest, and we'll be sending you an application pack with links to all the forms and the required documentation that you need to read for you to prepare your application. And I've also explained what the assessment process entails, and also the decision, the final decision made on your application. So hopefully I've addressed some of the questions you have in relation to the process, but we'll soon move into the Q&A session for you to be able to ask any specific questions. Before we get to that, let me just quickly outline some next steps. I mentioned that the PDRS method guide is now available on our website, so you can access that and read about the new activities included in the PDRS scheme and the new requirements. Application forms and the updated application guide will be published early next week. When we do the poll now, if you want to receive the application pack, please indicate, and we'll be emailing that to you. Then you can submit your applications in TESSA from the 1st of August. So there's still a few weeks time for you to fill in all the forms and prepare all the documentation. So for when TESSA then goes live, you can then upload all that documentation and apply via TESSA. Please subscribe for the PDRS updates. If you haven't already done so, there will be more updates coming in the next few months. There will be a further training in the lead up to 1st of November when the battery activities go live. There will be opportunities then to talk a little bit more about the technical requirements associated with these activities. So please check your emails and keep an eye for those updates. We'll run into the Q&A, but we're just leaving our contact details there. So if you have any questions about the forum or how to apply, feel free to email us at that email address or give us a call.